Right now, the Russian army is formidable only in its own myths and failures. The events near Kupyansk are a cold shower for Putin and Gerasimov. The armed forces of Ukraine are demonstrating precise and devastating work. Pokrovsk is ablaze with confrontation. Our forces are meeting the enemy with a barrage of fire. A thorough sweep is underway in Myrnohrad. Ukrainian land is being cleansed of the occupiers. Whether the enemy is planning to withdraw from there for good, we'll find out in just a moment.
The chief of the general staff of the occupying forces, Gerasimov, reported to Putin about the capture of the city of Kupyansk in the Kharkiv region, according to the Kremlin general. Similarly, the Russian West Group is fighting for Kucherivka, Kurilivka and Kupyansk-Vuzlovyi, actively advancing toward Krasny Lyman.
The units of the Zapad Group have chosen the city of Kupyansk and continue to destroy the Ukrainian military formations encircled on the left bank of the Oskil River. The offensive is successfully developing in the Rubtsovsk and Krasny Lyman directions.
The lie about the capture of Kupyansk is very similar to the seizure of Pokrovsk. A year ago, Russian generals were already talking about capturing this city in Donetsk region. 3 weeks ago, Putin himself invited journalists to come there. And to this day, Pokrovsk, like Kupyansk, remains under the control of the Ukrainian armed forces.
Ruslan Gerasimov reports that Kupyansk has been taken.
But in reality, Kupyansk has not been taken, and this is stated not only by historians in Ukraine, but also, for example, by the Institute for the Study of War, which refuted General Gerasimov's claim. But there is nothing new about this. This is typical lying by Russian generals.
The information about the capture of the city was also denied by the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine.
The leadership of the terrorist state continues to produce cheap informational provocations. In particular, the chief of the General Staff of the Russian Federation, Gerasimov, reported to the Russian ruler about the alleged complete capture of the settlements of Kupyansk in the Kharkiv region and Yampil in Donetsk region. The General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine reports that Kupyansk remains under the control of the Ukrainian Defense Forces. Counter-sabotage operations and special actions to search for and eliminate enemy sabotage and reconnaissance groups are ongoing in the city and its outskirts, which have infiltrated the city.
The 7th Air Assault Corps of the Armed Forces of Ukraine notes that the enemy is being forced to deploy reserves as its forces are becoming exhausted.
The defense forces are holding designated lines in the northern part of Pokrovsk. We also control positions south of the railway, which are important for further deoccupation. The enemy is trying to cross the railway to expand the area of occupation in the city, but our troops are blocking these attempts. The enemy troops in Pokrovsk are being depleted. As a result, the enemy is forced to replenish losses among its personnel. The Russian command has already deployed the operational reserve of the Center Group, units of the 76th Air Assault Division, in our area of responsibility.
Unfortunately, these reserves, though of low quality, still outnumber the capabilities of the Ukrainian armed forces several times over.
It's no secret to anyone that throughout the entire war, the enemy has had a significant advantage in manpower. If in 2022 this wasn't as noticeable, since at that time the advantage was about 1.5 times, and then it grew to 2. Now, according to various estimates, the enemy outnumbers us in manpower, at least on our section of the front, by 3.5 to 4 times. Dmitro Filatov, commander of the 1st Separate Assault Battalion, named after Dmitro Kotsiubailo.
In Myrnohrad, the armed forces of Ukraine also have the situation fully under control. The clearing of enemy infantry is being completed. Out of desperation, the Russians are striking Myrnohrad with FAB bombs, but this does not yield the desired result. Despite enormous losses, the Russians are trying to infiltrate in small groups both into Myrnohrad and Pokrovsk, as well as the outskirts of these cities. But these attempts are being harshly suppressed. Unfortunately, the Russian army has made minor advances in the Zaporizhzhia and Dnipropetrovsk directions due to their significant advantage in infantry, which is strongly felt. At the moment, the Ukrainian armed forces simply do not have enough personnel on the front lines.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
7 minutes ago, Trump tore the Russian peace plan to shreds. Zelensky did it. Moscow was left empty-handed. Shock, only a week left until peace. Washington has finally opened its eyes. Harsh sanctions are hitting Russia. The Kremlin is raging at the front. Last attempts to dominate. Wow, slavery for soldiers on the front line. Putin has hit a new low yet again. Europe has prepared a collective revenge. The united Western forces are moving into the rear of the Ukrainian armed forces. Aviation is airborne, the countdown has begun. All this in our episode Hellpoint. Urgently, Trump is rewriting the peace plan. Zelensky has reached an agreement on everything with the head of the White House behind closed doors. Washington is turning away from Moscow and Russian officials are avoiding eye contact. Everything has gone off Putin's script. Kiev is leading the West, has made its position clear, and Ukraine is standing its ground. Will it be possible to formalize all the agreements on paper and finally tear URF away? The last chance for dominance. More on this in just a moment.
The negotiations in Geneva regarding Trump's peace plan are of decisive importance. Representatives from the US, Ukraine, and national security advisors from France, the United Kingdom, and Germany participated, working on the American draft plan to end the war in Ukraine.
Ukraine is approaching this process with a clear understanding of its own interests. This is another stage in the dialogue that has been ongoing in recent days. And above all, it is intended to coordinate a shared vision for the next steps.
Trump's aides, US Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, and Secretary of State Marco Rubio also attended the meeting.
The meeting was the most productive and substantive of all those held so far. In
the Ukrainian president's office, they are ready to work as quickly as possible to achieve real peace.
Ukraine never wanted this war and will do everything to end it with an honorable peace. Ukraine will never be an obstacle to peace, and representatives of the Ukrainian state will defend the just interests of the Ukrainian people and the foundations of European security. We are grateful for the willingness of our European partners to help.
Ukraine's allies seek to rewrite Trump's proposal, which they believe would benefit Russia. They disagree with at least 4 points.
We strictly adhere to the principle that borders must not be changed by force. We are also concerned about the proposed restrictions on the armed forces of Ukraine, which would leave Ukraine vulnerable to future attacks. This is tantamount to military castration and makes Ukraine perpetually vulnerable to a third invasion.
The leaders of European states agreed to take the draft as a basis and expressed their willingness to work on it together.
We have made very good progress and we are moving towards a just and lasting peace. Ukrainians deserve peace more than anyone else on this planet. We believe that our great friend, the USA, especially President Trump and his team, will affirm this peace.
Keith Kellogg is confident that Trump will be able to end this war.
The foundation of the agreement has already been established. We are almost on the home stretch to ending the war. There are aspects of the plan that should be spelled out and explained more clearly. There will also be security guarantees with the United States as the main guarantor in order to avoid the mistakes of the Budapest Memorandum and the Minsk agreements.
Currently, the media are reporting that Trump has appointed Driscoll, a friend and former classmate of Vice President J.D. Vance, as his new special representative. It is quite possible that he will work in parallel with Keith Kellogg, who may leave the administration in January. Washington continues to insist on advancing its 28-point plan. According to this plan, Ukraine must make territorial concessions to Russia and reduce its army. The US and Europe commit to funding Ukraine's reconstruction. Sanctions on the Russian Federation are gradually lifted, and Moscow and Washington sign an agreement on long-term economic cooperation.
This is not our recommendation, this is our peace plan. This proposal was received, and as mediators, we agreed to share it. And we did not make it public. It leaked. It was not made public by our members or our representatives.
Donald Trump believes that Ukraine may make a decision to sign the peace plan on November 27th before Thanksgiving. But during a meeting with journalists, Trump noted that his peace plan is far from a final proposal.
No, it's far from final. We would like to achieve peace. It should have happened a long time ago. The war between Ukraine and Russia should never have happened. If I had been president, this would never have happened. We are trying to end it. One way or another, we have to end it.
On Friday, Zelensky addressed the Ukrainian people, stating that today Ukraine faces a difficult choice and risks either losing its dignity or its key partner.
This is one of the most difficult moments in our history. Right now, the pressure on Ukraine is among the greatest it has ever faced. At this moment, Ukraine may be facing a very difficult choice. Either the loss of dignity or the risk of losing a key partner.
Sources close to the Kremlin say that the provisions of this document should be seen more as a basis for a future agreement rather than as an agreement that Putin will officially sign.
If Kiev does not want to discuss President Trump's proposal and rejects it, then both they and the European warmongers must understand that incidents like those that happened in Kupyansk will inevitably be repeated. and on other key sections of the front as well. It may not happen as quickly as we would like, but inevitably it will be repeated. And overall, that's enough for us.
Moscow does not like the proposed security guarantees for Ukraine, the size of the army, or the use of frozen Russian assets to support Ukraine. We
have this text. We received it through the existing channel of communication with the American administration. I believe that it can also serve as the basis for a final peaceful settlement.
The Kremlin is creating informational conditions to reject the agreement. After all, Russia is not interested in making territorial concessions, according to the American Institute for the Study of War.
A Russian victory is not inevitable. Ukraine and the West can exploit several key Russian weaknesses to force the Kremlin to negotiate and make real concessions.
Meanwhile, the Kremlin is facing growing problems with material and human resources which continue to complicate Moscow's ability to sustain the war and its prolongation. That is why the Russian Federation is very interested in forcing Ukraine to surrender critically important territories that the Russian military is unlikely to be able to capture. That is why Gerasimov, when reporting the situation at the front to Putin, continues to exaggerate their successes. And Putin plays along in order to force Ukraine and the West to accept Russia's demands in negotiations.
Emergency. Moscow is under the world's scrutiny as a major oil strike is being prepared against the heart of the Russian Federation. In Washington, they are already counting down the hours. Trump has pressed the start button for the most powerful sanction strike. But this is only the beginning. Europe is launching a dynamic follow-up, preparing a harsh blow to Putin's shadow fleet. An explosive chain reaction that now seems impossible to break. Is it really true now that the dictator won't be able to hide or fool everyone around him? We'll talk about this in just a moment.
A new sanctions strike against Russia is being prepared by the US and Europe.
Europeans deserve a big plus for voicing, in my personal opinion, such truly high-quality, remarkably noteworthy initiatives and projects.
US President Donald Trump has called on the leader of the Republican majority in the Senate to step up work on a bipartisan bill for new sanctions against Russia.
If you want to bring President Vladimir Putin to the negotiating table, no plan with 28 points or 12 points will work unless President Putin believes that we will continue ongoing military support for Ukraine and that we will go after those who buy cheap Russian oil.
According to co-author of the bill, Lindsey Graham, Donald Trump signed it, making amendments under which the final decision on their implementation and removal remains personally with also the President of the United States. This refers to the so-called draconian sanctions with massive tariffs on countries that purchase oil from the Russian Federation.
As for the so-called shadow fleet, there are measures Europeans can do. About the shadow fleet, since much of this takes place in areas much closer to them.
At the same time, Europe has stepped up its efforts to combat the Russian shadow fleet. Germany, France, and Poland have proposed new EU measures against Russia's shadow fleet. Recently, it has
That is, according to preliminary estimates, there are now about 1,000 tankers.
The proposed measures do not target individual ships, but rather impose sanctions on the companies that register, insure, and provide logistics services for them, including those operating in European countries.
And by analyzing the documentation to understand where each vessel actually is and who is servicing these ships, the shadow tanker fleet, which of course will help verify them much more effectively than before. And accordingly to impose the maximum possible sanctions on them, that is, to prevent Russian oil and petroleum products from entering the European market.
According to Bloomberg data, which shows that against the backdrop of sanctions against Lukoil and Rosneft, the price of Russian Urals oil has dropped to its lowest level in recent. For 2.5 years, selling at $36.61 per barrel, the new restrictions will deal a significant blow to Putin's petrodollar cash cow.